Hi, I'm James Deaker, formerly an advertising executive at Yahoo, Verizon, and Oath. I also have a Stanford PhD. Today, I'm going to be talking about, within the context of digital advertising, why advertising agencies want incentives and how publishers should work with agencies to create those incentives. Before I start, if you're enjoying this content, please give me a subscribe and a like. It really does help. Let's get going. So, in my opinion, there are really only two main reasons that an agency asks a publisher for incentives or really for any special kind of treatment. The first is so that they can develop or deliver value to their clients, to the advertisers that they work with. And an example might be if the agency wanted to be able in a position to go to the advertiser and say, look, I can get you this publisher's inventory at a 10% discount off their rate card price. Or another example might be if they want to be able to say, I can get you access to premium inventory from this publisher that nobody else can get access to. That's all the sort of the first bucket of demonstrating value to their clients. The second bucket is that they want the money for themselves. In other words, it is a part of their business model. And how might this work? It would be an example where the agency might say, if I bring you $10 million in spend from different advertisers over the course of the year, you, publisher, I want you to pay me $1 million in payment at the end of the year. It's important to remember that different countries have different laws around how this kind of behavior can be treated. Some require that the behavior has to be disclosed to the end advertiser. Some require that if there are any kind of payments, they can't be in the form of cash. They have to be in bonus inventory or some other mechanism. And some require that if there are consulting services that are being provided, that those consulting services get provided at a market rate. Regardless of the motivation, it is usually in the publisher's interest to engage with the agencies to establish some kind of annual agreement. And so, what are the typical types of things that an agency might ask for? So here we see a partial list of some of the things that an agency may ask for from a publisher. It's a long list, but let's take them one at a time. The first is for the publisher to pay for some of the costs associated with the campaign. And this would be to take the burden off the advertiser or off the agency. And a typical request would be to cover things like third-party verification services or third-party rich media serving fees. The second thing that an agency might ask for is that they may mandate the technology that would be used around how fraud would get detected or how impressions would be counted. You could argue that this isn't an incentive per se, but the reason I'm putting it on this slide is it's the kind of major thing that dictates how agencies and publishers work together that usually comes up at exactly the same time of an annual agreement where agencies and publishers are talking about incentives. The third item is the priority. Agencies want their customers, the advertisers, to get access to the best inventory ahead of other advertisers. So one of the things that they will ask for in a programmatic type of environment is a first look or a private marketplace. In a traditional hand-sold waterfall environment, they would ask for the equivalent of Class 1 or reserved inventory in a way where their customers, their advertisers, are getting priority over other customers. An agency may also ask for explicit price discounts, and that can take many different forms. One example might be that the agency get its own rate card, so in other words, some form of discounting off the standard rate card. Or they may ask for commitments to both bonus and free inventory. And finally, on this slide is the question of fees, where This may be in the form of some kind of cash rebate, or it may be that the agency is asking for a fee where they will provide to the publisher some form of consulting services. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a gray zone where in some countries, in many countries, there will be laws around how that needs to be handled so that those services are paid for at a fair market rate. So, what is a publisher to do with these requests? One of the key principles that a publisher needs to be mindful of is around pricing law. And that usually states that similarly situated customers need to be treated in a similar way. So, a publisher needs to have a structured program in place that outlines how they intend to deal with different classes of agency. As discussed in the interview I did with Aubrey Orkamp on Europe, it's essential that as part of these programs, we align our incentives in a way that publishers and agencies are working towards the same goal. The way that I've usually seen this done is that there is a tiered type of approach in an agreement. So for example, as a agency spends more money, they're going to earn more awards. This may work in a way where if an agency spends $1 million or their clients spend $1 million, the publisher then has to give them a rebate, let's say on the order of $100,000. Sometimes the incentives get greater as the spend gets greater. So at a $2 million threshold, the agency might get a 12% rebate instead of the 10% rebate. Now, if we look at a graphic of how this reward structure would play out, it looks like a staircase. You can see that as the spend on the x-axis hits $1 million, then $2 million, the reward goes up. And you could argue, or one might expect, that the steps are getting larger as you're going up the staircase. An alternative is that the increments instead change in the breakpoints. So let me give an example graphically of what that might look like. And it's more similar to the way your income taxes work with the IRS in the US. For example, we may structure it so that if you get to $1 million, then for each additional dollar you spend, you get 10 cents back. Continuing the example, once you get to $2 million, you might get 12 cents back. And although it's not particularly clear in this example on the screen, what we can see is that the slope gets slightly greater in this example once you get to $2 million. Now, the interesting thing here is that the profile on the left and the profile on the right vary considerably, which is why the actual numbers will generally be heavily negotiated because the reward structure on the left could be fundamentally very different than the reward structure on the right-hand side. So why am I showing this graph? The reason is that I have seen discussions between publisher and agency teams start, and weeks into the negotiation, the two teams, one for the publisher and one for the agency, realize their expectations of how the tiering structure work are fundamentally different. The agency might think that the payout will look like on the graph on the left, while the publisher thinks that they would pay out more like the graph on the right, and that has the potential to potentially derail the conversation. In fact, if there is one takeaway from the conversation today, it is that there are many different dimensions that agencies and publishers can negotiate on. So the first thing is to ensure that both sides are having candid conversations about the nature of what they're trying to achieve before they jump in to start talking about the numbers. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video, and if there are other topics that you would like to see me cover, please put them in the comments section below.